From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It has been like 22 years, and because of the fight between Ethiopia and Eritrea, we had no even address to communicate with our family.
A historic peace deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea ends 20 years of a state of war that saw 70,000 people killed and thousands of families separated. We'll get response from Ethiopian writer Awal Ilo and from Eritrean human rights activist Vanessa Berha, whose uncle, a journalist, has been jailed since 2001. Then, as hundreds of migrant families remain separated, more than 2,000, we'll speak with Reveal reporter Aura Bogado about how some children released from federally contracted shelters had scabies and lice, while others were injected with drugs against their will. She's also exposed a second office used by the military CIA contractor MVM to hold migrant children. This time, the children had to bathe in bathroom sinks.
In this case, a private contractor with heavy ties to the CIA. In fact, it was founded by ex-CIA secret agents, had an office in which neighbors described dozens of children going in over the span of several weeks and never leaving until 3 weeks later.
And we'll look at the emotional and psychological impact of family separation with a Salvadoran mother who reunited with her 3-year-old son last week after they were separated by immigration officials at the border.
The day we reunited, the reunion, it was like he felt hurt that I had left him. Something like that. I felt like he had something that he wanted to tell me, but at his age, he just couldn't express it because he just stayed looking at me with a gaze that told me everything.
Also speak with psychoanalyst Nancy Burke, who helped publish a pamphlet aimed at helping immigrant parents separated from their children. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House said Thursday President Trump will invite Russian President Vladimir Putin to visit Washington, D.C. in the fall. News of the invitation capped a week of damage control by the White House after Trump said at a summit with Putin in Helsinki he didn't see any reason why Russia would have meddled in the 2016 election. Trump's invitation to Putin appeared to catch top administration officials by surprise. This is NBC News correspondent Andrea Mitchell breaking the news to the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, during the Aspen Security Forum in Colorado on Thursday.
The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming
Did I hear you? Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
But not everyone in the Washington, D.C. establishment is opposed to inviting Putin to the White House. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Thomas Pickering, told CNN today, "The president we got is the president we got. The problems we have with Russia are the problems we have with Russia. Not talking never gets you anywhere." Meanwhile, the White House on Thursday said it was no longer considering an unprecedented proposal that would have seen Russian interrogators question former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul and other U.S. citizens in exchange for allowing Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team to interview 12 Russians indicted last week for allegedly hacking the emails of Democrats during the 2016 election. Trump was initially warm to the proposal proposed by President Putin, calling it an incredible offer. But Trump reversed course Thursday after the Senate voted 98-0 for a non-binding resolution opposing any such deal, and after current and former diplomats rallied to the defense of McFaul, saying Trump's move would undermine the bedrock principle of diplomatic immunity. The resolution came after Republican leaders barred a vote on 2 other Russia-related measures. One, proposed by Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, would have demanded President Trump speak with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Another resolution would have backed the finding by U.S. intelligence agencies that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. That resolution had the support of Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake.
Mr. President, in his dystopian novel, 1984, George Orwell wrote, quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their most final, essential command," unquote. Well, we saw earlier this week in Helsinki what was truly an Orwellian moment.
The Trump administration Thursday announced plans to roll back the Endangered Species Act, ordering federal agencies to consider economic impacts before listing animals as protected under the law. The newly proposed guidelines by the Interior Department would allow corporations involved in mining, drilling, or other forms of extraction to proceed with projects that would otherwise be prohibited. In response, the Natural Resources Defense Council tweeted, "This is unacceptable. The ESA is a wildly successful piece of legislation that has prevented 99% of the species it protects from going extinct." Aides to former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt held a newly purchased office desk in storage to air it out for days after raising concerns it contained formaldehyde. That's according to Politico, which obtained an email showing staffers sought to shield Pruitt from the toxic chemical after he purchased the desk as part of a $9,500 redecoration of his office. Politico reports that just months later, the same aides blocked the release of a report on the health dangers of formaldehyde. That report continues to be blocked. Declaring that health care is a human right, at least 70 Democrats have signed on to a new Medicare for All House caucus. Speaking on Capitol Hill Thursday, caucus co-chair, Congressmember Pramila Jayapal of Washington State, said the U.S. could provide universal health care by lowering the age of Medicare eligibility from 65 to 0.
We are united today by the common conviction that health care is a human right. That health care must be affordable and accessible to all residents of the United States, and that one of the best ways to ensure health care for all is to use the system that already exists for millions of seniors over the last half-century, and that is Medicare.
Wells Fargo said Thursday it'll refund hundreds of thousands of its customers after it tacked on tens of millions of dollars in fees for services they never requested, including insurance against identity theft and debt protection. This comes just months after federal regulators fined Wells Fargo $1 billion for forcing people to buy auto insurance policies they didn't need, for improperly charging mortgage holders, and for other financial crimes. On Capitol Hill, Democrats in the Senate Banking Committee grilled Kathy Kraninger, President Trump's nominee to head the beleaguered Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency opposed by Republicans which has seen its operations severely curtailed under the Trump administration. This is North Dakota Democrat Heidi Heitkamp questioning Kraninger.
Have you ever worked at a bank or a credit union?
Senator, I have not,
Okay.
and like many other...
Have you ever had oversight or regulated a bank or a credit union?
No, Senator, I have not, like many
Have you ever been responsible for oversight or leadership in supervising payday lenders?
No, Senator, I have not. Like
Kraninger is a senior official at the White House Office of Management and Budget who's proposed cutting nearly $150 million, or about a quarter, from the CFPB's budget. She assisted the Trump administration's bungled response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and helped craft the zero-tolerance policy at the U.S.-Mexico border that's seen thousands of immigrant children separated from their parents. This is Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren.
You see the videos of some of these children being returned to their parents after long separations. They're dazed, they're unsmiling, they're dirty. It's like the life has been sucked out of them. These are innocent children who may be scarred forever by this policy. It is fundamentally immoral, and you were part of it, Ms. Kraninger. It is a moral stain that will follow you for the rest of your life.
Senator Warren's comments came as federal officials reported Thursday just 364 of more than 2,500 families with children age 5 and older have been brought back together, less than a week before a court-ordered deadline to reunite the children and parents. We'll have more on the emotional and psychological impact of the Trump administration's immigration policies later in the broadcast. In the Gaza Strip, one Palestinian was killed, 3 others wounded Wednesday after Israeli warplanes bombed a security observation post near the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. Israel said it was targeting Palestinians launching incendiary devices on kites flown over Israel's militarized border with Gaza, which it blames for burning crops on Israeli farms. In southern Israel, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman said today Israel is preparing to launch a, quote, large and painful military operation that he said would rival the 2014 assault on Gaza, which killed over 2,300 Palestinians while leaving 17,000 injured. This came as Israel further tightens its blockade on the Gaza Strip, barring deliveries of natural gas and other fuels. In a statement, the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said Israel's fuel blockade would exacerbate the already dire living conditions in Gaza and raise concerns of collective punishment. Back in the United States, at least 11 people drowned Thursday evening in Branson, Missouri, after their amphibious duck boat capsized on a lake as wind gusts from a severe thunderstorm topped 60 miles an hour. The deaths came as more than 24 tornadoes tore through central Iowa, injuring 17 people, tearing the roofs off buildings in the cities of Pella and Marshalltown. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen on Thursday backed President Trump's defense of violent white supremacists who attacked counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia last August, saying both sides were to blame for attacks that left one counter-protester, an anti-racist protester, dead and dozens more injured. Nielsen made the remark at a forum organized by the Aspen Institute.
I think what's important about that conversation is it's not that one side is right, one side is wrong. Anybody that is advocating violence, we need to work to mitigate.
Last August 11th, hundreds of torch-bearing white supremacists held a march on the campus of the University of Virginia chanting "Blood and soil" and "Jews will not replace us." The next day, members of the group attacked counter-protesters, firing at least one shot from a pistol, brutally beating 20-year-old DeAndre Harris in a parking garage before a neo-Nazi named James Alex Fields drove his car into a crowd of demonstrators, killing a local paralegal named Heather Heyer and injuring at least 19 others. In New York City, the New York Police Department said Thursday it'll immediately hold internal disciplinary hearings for Sergeant Danielle Pantaleo, the officer filmed killing African-American Staten Island resident Eric Garner with a fatal chokehold July 2014, while Garner gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times. Speaking on Democracy Now! Wednesday, Eric Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, said she wants to see other officers on the scene of her son's death held accountable.
What I would like to see is that all of the officers that was involved in my son's death that day be accountable and transparent, and that they get fired from the force, because they're the ones that is responsible for my son's death.
And in New York's Hudson Valley, protesters gathered Wednesday outside the Troy Police Department to demand justice for Democracy McDonald, an unarmed African-American man who was fatally shot last August during a traffic stop. The protest came after a grand jury voted not to indict Jared Eiler, the police officer who shot McDonald in the head and arm. Protesters called for Governor Andrew Cuomo to appoint an independent prosecutor and demanded the city of Troy create a civilian review board, drawing comparisons to the national pattern of police officers receiving preferential treatment after extrajudicial shootings of people of color. This is Democracy McDonald's uncle, Messiah Cooper, speaking Wednesday.
We have to call for change. We have to call on the governor to step in, and not only when there is a murder, but in any aggressive force used by the police. If their firearm is discharged, the Attorney General needs to step in and handle the case. IG. Yes. It just can't be if they kill us. And even when they kill us, we still receive no justice.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show looking at the historic peace effort in East Africa between Ethiopia and Eritrea, where leaders of the neighboring countries have signed a joint declaration of peace and friendship and declared an end to nearly 2 decades of a state of war. From 1998 to 2000, Ethiopia and Eritrea fought a border war in which 70,000 people were killed. Since then, ongoing disputes had kept the two countries countries in a state of conflict. On Thursday, the pro-government Eritrean press agency announced on its Facebook page Eritrea has withdrawn its troops from the heavily militarized border with Ethiopia as a, quote, gesture of reconciliation. On Wednesday, the first direct flights between Ethiopia and Eritrea in 20 years took off from Addis Ababa, headed to Eritrea's capital, Asmara. The majority of the flight's passengers were members of families separated by the long-running state of war between the two countries. This is an Eritrean passenger, Abraham Tilahun.
It has been like 22 years, and because of the fight between Ethiopia and Eritrea, we had no even address to communicate with our family. But since Ethiopia and Eritrea create peace, we have come here. I have come here to look for my grand family, and I have a business in Addis, so I'm planning to open sister company in Asmara as well.
Meanwhile, on Monday, Eritrea reopened its embassy in Ethiopia. Ethiopia's prime minister and Eritrea's president spoke at the event in Addis Ababa.
Forgiveness is to count the trespasses, the pushes and pains caused against you in today's and tomorrow's journey. Even if the offender doesn't ask for forgiveness, the offended has the right to forgive. It is not necessary to have a recipient to make forgiveness. Forgiveness gives mental relief for the offender and the liberty of the soul for the offended.
Because of our past historical and cultural synergy, we have overcome the plot to spread hate and revenge among ourselves, and we are determined to move forward together to register in development, prosperity, and stability in all aspects.
Well, for more on this historic peace deal and what comes next, we're joined by two guests. Awal Olo is a frequent Ethiopian political commentator, lecturer at the Keele University School of Law in Staffordshire, England. His recent article for Al Jazeera is headlined Torture, State Terrorism and Ethiopia's Transformation. And joining us from London, Vanessa Berha, an Eritrean human rights activist who founded the group One Day, Seyoum, which campaigns for the release of her uncle, an Eritrean photojournalist who's been in prison since 2001. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! We're going to begin right now with Awal Olo. Can you talk about the significance of this coming together of Eritrea and Ethiopia?
I mean, as you said, this is such a historic, I think, coming together of two countries who had such a strong connection, one of the most, proximate societies you could find around the world. So for these countries to go beyond the kind of pain, the traumas and sufferings of that, the suffering that is induced by that senseless war, an absolutely meaningless war, and to get to a place where the two countries and their leaders can stand together and say, we have been deprived of those very important moments of togetherness, and now is the time to move forward and forge a better future for both countries. I think that is a historic and extremely significant move, not just for the two countries, but also for the broader region.
Can you talk about how this was accomplished for people who are not familiar with the history between Ethiopia and Eritrea?
So Ethiopia and Eritrea are two of the most closely connected countries. And the reason is Eritrea was part of Ethiopia until 1991. Before 1991, there were several movements that have been fighting against the Ethiopian government. And one of the most strongest movement was a movement that was fighting for the liberation of Eritrea, led by the current Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki, and several movements fighting on the Ethiopian side. And the strongest movement was fighting on the Ethiopian side with the Tigray Liberation Movement, which was led by the former Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. It was led by other people over the course of time, but it was Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea and Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia that finally brought down the Ethiopian government. So these are people who knew each other very well, who fought against the Ethiopian government shoulder to shoulder. About 7 years after Eritrea became, around 8 years after Eritrea became independent, there were disagreements around a range of political and economic policy issues between the two leaderships. And the two leaderships were not able to solve their differences peacefully, and they used Badme, which is really a desolate piece of land that is hardly good for anything, as a pretext to go to war. And it was one of the most senseless and meaningless war, precisely because there was absolutely no justification for those two countries, two people to go to war to resolve those disputes. So by the end of the war, the two countries agreed to settle their disputes peacefully. And one important component of that peaceful resolution was to submit their differences to Ethiopian-Eritrean Boundary Commission, an independent boundary commission that will look at all the legal issues and settles. And both countries agreed that the decision of the commission would be final and binding on both countries. And the commission looked at the matter and reached a conclusion, essentially giving Badme to Eritrea and some other territories which were previously part of Eritrea to Ethiopia. And then the Ethiopian government essentially refused to abide by the decision, citing a number of technicalities. And obviously what we had was a no peace, no war situation, both countries bent on stabilizing one another, not just the two countries, but also within the region. And I think the 2006 war between Ethiopia and Somalia, when Ethiopia entered Somalia, was very much a proxy war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So that destabilized the region. It also significantly affected the democratic landscape within both Ethiopia and Eritrea.
And where did the United States fit into this picture and its relationships with Ethiopia and Eritrea?
So Ethiopia is a very large country, had a very strong diplomatic clout. Ethiopia used the global war on terror very strategically. It deliberately manufactured the crisis in the region to get the United States and Europeans on its side. It became one of the almost the kind of policeman and a key counterterrorism ally of the United States in the Horn of Africa. And as a result, Ethiopia received financial and economic as well as technical support from the United States. But at the same time, there was a process of isolating and sidelining Eritrea by the Ethiopian government. So the United States role was not constructive at all. And the number of sanctions that were imposed against Eritrea, by and large, they were the concerted efforts of Ethiopia and the United States government. So the Ethiopian government used the discourse and the language of the war on terror, not just to isolate Eritrea by presenting itself as the only power that can provide stability in the Horn of Africa, but also to engage in practice of repression within Ethiopia itself. So the U.S. role has not been constructive at all, and I don't think the U.S. actually played any part in the current rapprochement between the two countries. If the U.S. played any role, it was very, very marginal. This is, I think, the success of two countries, two African countries, without needing the support or babysitting of Western governments, sitting together, hammering out key issues. And they have reached, I think, to a very important milestone. We'll see where they can go from here. But I think everything, from those clips that you played earlier, suggests that there is such a strong desire and a wish on the part of both countries to move forward.
This is Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed speaking earlier this month.
If there is peace between Ethiopian and Eritrean people, the Horn of Africa region will be a region of peace and development. Our people who live scattered as refugees in humiliation will come back with dignity. Our citizens will not be sold and exchanged like commodities.
In addition to Wal Olo, the Ethiopian commentator and lecturer at Keele University School of Law in Britain, Vanessa Berha is with us, Eritrean human rights activist whose uncle, an Eritrean photojournalist, was imprisoned in 2001 and has been there ever since, close to, 17 years now. Vanessa, your thoughts on what this historic moment?
For me, the war with Ethiopia, or the situation with Ethiopia, is only relevant in its relationship to the situation in Eritrea. Eritrea today is considered to be one of the world's worst dictatorships in the entire world, and the government has justified the situation in Eritrea by using this war. So peace, for me, does not necessarily mean peace between Ethiopians and Eritreans. That's not my main priority. My main priority is peace for the Eritrean people, peace in Eritrea. in their lives when it comes to education, when it comes to national service, when it comes to freedom of movement, when it comes to freedom of religion, peace for them. And to this extent, we haven't seen any kind of remarks regarding the situation in Eritrea. And until that point has come, I can't celebrate and I can't be optimistic about this peace.
Vanessa, can you talk about your uncle and what has happened to him?
So following the war in 1998 from 2000, the Eritrean government decided to turn the country into dictatorship. They shut down the free press, imprisoned dissident voices, journalists, politicians who'd been criticizing the government's actions and their postponement of the elections. And my uncle was one of the journalists who was imprisoned then. None of the people have been released, but given a trial. Family members have not been able to visit them or get any information about their whereabouts. And he has been imprisoned together with his colleagues now for 17 years. And I've been advocating for him from abroad for now 5 years, and we haven't gotten any information from the government. Every time we've been submitting legal documents, we've been advocating for him and for his colleagues at forums, at conferences, at the UN, at the African Union. The reply that we always get is that the second the war with Ethiopia ends, the second this conflict, the border dispute is over, everything will go back to normal. Your uncle will be released, national service, indefinite national service will end, the free press will be opened again, the elections will happen. These are the promises that we've been given from the government in Eritrea, and these are the promises that we're still waiting to be not only implemented, but even addressed.
Sayum Sae, your uncle was the head of one of the founders of Eritrean state television?
Yep. He was, during the war, he was a war photographer, and he was one of the most prominent war photographers. He trained up a lot of the other war photographers and documented the war with Ethiopia. After the war, he became, like you said, founded and was the director of ERITV, the state television, and later became documentary maker. A lot of his work is still being used by the Eritrean government, but his name is not being put there. His photographs are hanging up in the museums, they're on television, they're being sold as postcards, but his name has been deleted, and their attempt to erase him from the Eritrean memory has been very, very efficient, unfortunately. And that is why I campaign for him. That is why other people campaign for him and people like him in Eritrea.
A global survey released Thursday on conflict, government repression, and modern slavery found North Korea and Eritrea have the world's highest rates of enslaved people. The 2018 Global Slavery Index, published by the human rights group Walk Free Foundation, found the Eritrean government is a, quote, repressive regime that abuses its conscription system to hold its citizens in forced labor for decades. Can you explain what this conscription system is? Describe its impact on people fleeing the country.
So, as I mentioned before, after the war ended, the government decided to use the war as justification for several of their policies. The shutdown of the free press, the fact that the National Assembly, the parliament has been called. Another thing that they implemented then was indefinite national service. National service is supposed to be 18 months, but till this day, it's indefinite. People are, enlisted and then they're never released, and they're sent out places in the country where they have no connection to on an indefinite basis. People who have children, people who have families, not only to be with but also to feed. And the amount of money that they get is so limited that people are dependent on outside sources, so family members, friends from abroad. And this has been referred to as one of the main reasons why people leave the country. Over 5,000 people, according to UNHCR, leave Eritrea every month. And a lot of them are young people who were conscripted when they're extremely young, their last year of high school. And then after that, they're forced to stay if they do not finish their tests, or if they do not get the right results for their test, where they can start colleges. But the university has been shut down, and they've been placed in colleges if they receive the right marks. If they do not receive the right marks, they are enlisted into this national service program. And it isn't just the fact that it's indefinite; it's the fact that the conditions there are completely horrible. The rape. And all these different kind of human rights abuses have been documented and have also been, like you mentioned, criticized by foreign groups, because there are no NGOs in Eritrea right now. NGOs are forbidden by the government. So the United Nations, for example, released a report likening this national service program to slavery.
I wanted to turn to the story of Zarosne Ermias Tesfatsion, who sought asylum in the United States after fleeing his home country of Eritrea. He was detained here for more than a year. He was then deported back to Eritrea. And going through the Cairo airport in Egypt, he took his own life. He died by suicide. I spoke to Zarisnai's friend, Barakat Sabatu, who would meet with him as a volunteer translator at the Broward Transitional Center in South Florida. It's an immigrant detention center. Did he tell you what he most feared if he were deported to Eritrea?
What he said in his testimony is, he said if they ask him, the lawyers, what would happen if he go back to Eritrea, he said, I might go jail or tortured, might be even get killed.
Do you believe that the U.S. deporting Zarisnai was a death sentence for him?
That's what I believe, because if they know Eritrea is not the right place right now, he cannot deport to Eritrea, why Zarisnai has to get deported? For that situation, he ended up killing himself.
Barakat Sabatu, the friend of Zarisnai, again held in the U.S. He was applying for political asylum. He was denied. He was deported and took his own life on his way back to Eritrea. I wanted to put that question to Awal Allo. What will happen to the situation in Eritrea that Vanessa has described?
I think the dividends for peace are not just economic and political security in relation to these areas. And I think there is also a human rights, democracy, rule of law related dividend that comes out of this. And the reason is, as Vanessa indicated, the Eritrean government consistently used the security situation, this no war, no peace situation with Ethiopia as a justification, not only to keep such a large number of army, but also to completely repress the domestic political environment. Now, if the security situation with Ethiopia is no longer there, if the two countries could have a peaceful, friendly relationship, the Eritrean government would have no justification whatsoever. And I think that in of itself, the fact that Eritrea would not have that kind of very clear, visible justification that it can point to, means that this is a positive thing for human rights and democracy in Eritrea as well. The second point is, even if Eritrea had a genuine concern that Ethiopia poses such a significant security threat to the point that Eritrea has to keep such a large army and repress the domestic environment, then that genuine justification no longer exists. And I think all eyes would be on the Eritrean government to see what it would do in terms of opening up the political process. And I think some of the actions that we have already seen within such a short span of time, which is releasing, for example, religious members of particularly certain religious communities which are persecuted in Eritrea. And I think that in of itself is a very important step. But, at the end of the day, I think what would happen to the question of democracy and human rights within Eritrea is really up to the Eritrean people and the Eritrean government. The Ethiopian state has been in exactly the same situation until very recently. And still the changes that we see in Ethiopia are quite fragile, and there is no guarantee that Ethiopia will be a democracy. The Ethiopian people fought, they paid the price to bring about the kind of change that we see now. So the decision as to what the future will hold in Ethiopia is not entirely up to the government now. It's also in the hands of the people. The people have clearly shown that they cannot tolerate a system that does not hear, that does not listen to the will of the people.
Vanessa Berha, I'm going to give you the last word. Eritrean human rights activist whose own uncle, the Eritrean photojournalist Sayum Tsaye, imprisoned since 2001. So you have the U.S. deporting people applying for political asylum back to Eritrea. You have your uncle's situation, other people in jail. Do you think the peace deal can improve the situation at all? And what are you calling for?
I call for the implementation of the Constitution. Since the war ended, the Eritrean government has refused to implement the Constitution and refused to implement the rule of law in Eritrea. The country is completely ruled by fear, not by law, as the UN report has said. And the people of Eritrea deserve so much better than this. Prisoners need to be released. The youth need to be, taken out from the national service and getting autonomy over their own lives. And the Eritrean government has to step down, and power has to be transferred to the people, and that is what I call for.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Vanessa Berha is an Eritrean human rights activist whose uncle, an Eritrean photojournalist, has been in prison since 2001. Awal is a commentator and teaches at Kiel University in Britain, the University School of Law, as we report on the historic peace deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And we'll continue to cover what happens there in East Africa. When we come back, thousands and thousands of children remain separated from their parents. What is the U.S. government doing to reunite them, a government that separated them in the first place? Stay with us.
ለሰው ልጆች ፍቅር ለሰው ልጆች ሰላም ለሰው ልጆች በዓለም ዙሪያ ሁሉ ሰላም ይሁን ምድሩ ሁሉ ሰላም 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 በዓለም ዙሪያ ሁሉ ለሰው ዘር በሙሉ
Salam means peace by Mahmoud Ahmed. Here on Democracy Now!, I'm Amy Goodman. The Trump administration has less than a week to meet a court-ordered deadline to reunite thousands of children and parents separated at the U.S.-Mexico border under its zero-tolerance policy. Federal officials reported Thursday just 364 of more than 2,500 families with children aged 5 and older have been brought back together. Another 848 have been cleared for reunification, but 229 parents have been deemed ineligible, reportedly because of criminal records or because they waived reunification. More than 700 of the parents have been ordered deported. This comes as advocates say some migrant children have been released from federally contracted shelters with scabies and lice. In Illinois, officials are investigating the Chicago nonprofit Heartland Alliance over allegations that housed children separated from their parents at the border, with many of the children reportedly suffering abuse and neglect. The Washington Post reported one boy at Heartland Alliance's facility, Casa Guadalupe, was repeatedly injected with a drug that made him drowsy, while another boy was denied medication for weeks after injuring his arm. The Washington Post also says children were surveilled with hidden cameras, prevented from hugging their brothers and sisters. They've been separated from their parents. A report by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting shows taxpayers paid more than $1.5 billion in the last 4 years to companies operating immigrant youth detention centers that faced accusations of serious lapses in care. Children held at Shiloh Treatment Center near Houston, Texas, were restrained and injected with powerful antipsychotic drugs against their will, making them dizzy, listless, obese, even incapacitated. Meanwhile, the U.S. military and CIA contractor, MVM, has admitted it detained migrant children overnight inside a vacant Phoenix office building with dark windows, no kitchen, only a few toilets. A Reveal investigation earlier this month uncovered what some are calling a black site for migrant children after a neighbor filmed children in sweatsuits being led into the building. The building was leased in March by MVM, a military contractor. Now, a new report by Reveal shows MVM also operated a second office nearby, where a neighbor reported seeing immigrant children bathing themselves in bathroom sinks. For more, we go to San Francisco for an update from Aura Bagado, who is immigration reporter for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. Her latest report headlined "Immigrant Kids Held in Second Phoenix Office Seen Bathing in Sinks." Her other report is headlined "Immigrant Children Forcibly Injected with Drugs, Lawsuit Claims." Aura, give us the latest.
Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for having me back. We just reported this first story out 2 weeks ago. Back then, we knew that children, according to neighbors, were held overnight in this office, this unlicensed, unmarked office in Central Phoenix. And at that time, ICE told us that its contractor, MVM, was not authorized to hold children overnight, that their contract only allows for same-day transport, and that they were allowed to use that office for what ICE calls a waiting area. The company itself, MVM, again, this company that has strong CIA ties, a defense contractor, told us, originally said that they don't operate any kind of shelter or housing, then told us that they use some of their offices as a temporary holding place for children that it's transporting. Less than a week after our initial report came out, MVM did have to confirm to reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting that it was indeed sometimes holding children overnight. We were able to figure that out from documents that we were able to gather about some of the children that were held there. Then just a few days later, we got some more information that there was a second office in which they were holding children overnight, also in Phoenix, less than a mile away from the first office, and MVM did also have to acknowledge that that was the case. So now we know about 2 places that are, again, unmarked, unlicensed, and neighbors sometimes know about the existence of them. MVM certainly knows about the existence of them, but they're not shelters, they're not exactly waiting areas, but there are places that have held children overnight. A lot of those children are children that were separated from their parents.
Who are the kids? Where are they from, these separated children?
All of the kids that I've identified have been from Latin America. They mostly are from Central America, specifically from Guatemala and from Honduras. Some of the kids did appear to arrive by themselves or with a group of friends, but most of the children that I've been able to identify that have been through there were indeed separated from their parents. At this point, I've tracked down several of the children. I've spoken with several of their sponsors. I've spoken with several of their parents. And that's also been really difficult conversations sometimes to have with their parents. There's a mother specifically that I've been speaking with. Her son was only 6 years old when he was taken from her and placed in this office building, which is, again, not a shelter. It's not licensed to operate as such. It's not authorized under its contract to hold children overnight. And I've had to, sometimes explain to parents who are still in detention, who are still separated from their children and want to know anything that they can. I need to sort of explain to them where they were held. Some of the questions that parents ask me are, who were they with? Were they with other children? Were they with adults? Is this a place where they got regular meals? Is this a place where they could take a shower? And, when it comes to taking a shower with the second facility, a neighbor there, Bill Weaver, explained to me that on multiple occasions over the course of 2 years, he saw children using bathroom sinks to bathe themselves. This is a shared office bathroom area in which 3 office suites were able to sort of go in and out. Just like you see in a lot of offices, it's not exactly a public bathroom, but people can come in and out. So that also raises a lot of questions about what kinds of people may have come into contact with these children over the time that they were held in these offices by MVM.
Oda, you were the first to report on the drugging of children. That was at Shiloh in Texas. We're now seeing this Washington Post report about Casa Guadalupe. That's in Chicago, run by Heartland Alliance. So in that case, we hear about kids being injected with some kind of drugs that kids don't understand. Explain what you found.
Sure. I'm not too familiar with what the Chicago story. I have been so laser focused on trying to track down the children that we know were held at MVM offices. But I do know from the story that we broke about Shiloh and the widespread abuses in so many of these shelters, the shelters that we do know the existence and locations of, everything ranging from sexual assault to neglect, and then, yes, forced drugging. In Shiloh, children do allege that they were held down and injected with very powerful drugs. I spent time with a little boy who was 9 years old when he spent 6 months there, and he was given very, very, very heavy psychotropic drugs. I was just texting with his mom, actually, earlier today, Maribel Bernardes. She finally got her son back after 6 months. But, you know, during the whole time he was there, she was so worried because she saw him lethargic. She couldn't recognize this child that she was sometimes seeing through WhatsApp video when she was able to call and see him. He felt very slow. He told me that he just felt like he was really slow and tired when he was there. And, you know, he wound up at this facility because he tried to run away. He wanted to be with his mom. We know that children miss their parents, and he wanted very desperately to be with his mom, so he talked about running away. And he tried to run away, and that was one of the reasons for which he was evaluated by a psychiatrist and then sent to Shiloh, where he was drugged for 6 months without his consent and without his mother's consent. The government knew full well where she was the entire time. A caseworker was in touch with her that entire time. They wouldn't give her custody of him, and they kept drugging him that whole time. She's still working to taper him off of those drugs. He's only 10 years old now.
Aura Bogado, I want to thank you for being with us. Immigration reporter for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. We'll link to your pieces. Immigrant kids held in second Phoenix office seen bathing in sinks, and your other reports. Immigrant children forcibly injected with drugs, lawsuit claims. This is Democracy Now! In 30 seconds, we'll go to a report of a mother who talks about reuniting with her 3-year-old boy. And we'll speak with a psychoanalyst who is warning parents of separated children when they reunite, they may not be the same child that left them. Stay with you. Stay with us. A soul in pain, Mon Laferte, here on Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show looking at the emotional and psychological impact of family separation. On Wednesday, Democracy Now!'s Laura Gottesdiener sat down with a Salvadoran mother named Belki Yesenia Castillo Cortez. She reunited with her 3-year-old son, Michael, last week after they were separated by immigration officials at the border in Texas. Federal documents show the mother and son arrived at the legal port of entry in Rio Grande City on May 28th to apply for asylum in the U.S. Immigration authorities detained them, then separated them, sending Belki to the Port Isabel Detention Center in Texas, while her 3-year-old son was flown all the way here to New York and held in a facility run by a human services agency called Abbott House. Laura began by asking Belki what it was like to be reunited with her son on July 11th.
Suddenly they called me, and oh, it was so beautiful because it had been 41 days without my son, and I felt like I couldn't any longer. The reunion with my son was something, well, it was emotional, but also sad because he didn't react the way his mother, the way I imagined he would have reacted. He just turned and looked at me. He didn't cry, he just looked into my eyes. He looked at me and never broke his gaze. No, it wasn't easy. It was beautiful to reunite with him. But to be confronted with this, no. A week has passed, exactly. At the beginning, it was the same. He didn't seem to love me very much, but now, thank God, it's changing a bit. Now he knows our family. Now he's remembered because, well, maybe it's more like he never forgot. It was just the feelings that he had because he felt abandoned.
And are there any changes in his attitude or his behavior or personality?
Sí, hay diferencia.
Yes, there are differences. His behavior is really aggressive. He doesn't listen to me at all. Yes, I'm having this problem because since we arrived, he's been acting this way, and he wasn't like this before. I went with him in buses the whole way, and imagine coming from El Salvador to the United States by bus. I would have had to return with a child like this, but then he traveled really calmly. I brought him from there to here and everything was fine, because in truth he wasn't like this before. Because to travel 6 hours, 8 hours on a bus with a child, as he's acting now, I imagine I would have had to return to my country. But no, he held out till the 28th of May, and now he's acting very differently.
What differences do you see? You said he was acting a bit aggressively. How does this manifest?
Yes, he doesn't listen. He's violent, more than anything else with me. Ever since he was released to me, he doesn't listen to me anymore. Sometimes he hits me. The day we reunited, the reunion, it was like he felt hurt that I had left him. Something like that. I felt like he had something that he wanted to tell me, but at his age, he just couldn't express it because he just stayed looking at me with a face, with a gaze that told me everything.
Why did you come here? Why did you decide to come?
Because I'm in danger in my country. I'm in danger because of the gangs, because of the discrimination, the threats. The same person who raped me in January 2014 is the person who left me pregnant with my child.
Fui discriminada también en mi país.
I was discriminated against in my country for being a lesbian. They beat me, even some of my friends, when I was 16. And the father, if I can call him that, he raped me for the same reason, for being a lesbian, and with the aim of making me pregnant.
Quiero un futuro. Para empezar con la persona.
I want a future. I want to begin a future with a person I love, to marry. I also want that. I want to be happy with my child and my family. I also want protection and the support I don't have in my country. This is why I came, for a happy future. Because up until now, it hasn't. I've never had any freedom, not even with the girlfriends I've had. Absolutely nothing. It's as if we're not there. We've always been hidden. It hasn't been freedom or happiness. Not at all.
That was Belkí Yesenia Castillo Cortez, separated from her 3-year-old boy, Michael, for 41 days. She just reunited with him. She was speaking with Democracy Now!'s Laura Gottesdiener. The video produced by Anna Barsan and Cynthia Santos. Special thanks to Ali Toxtli. In 3-year-old Michael's discharge papers from Abbott House here in New York, a clinician described the child as having a laid-back personality and a quiet disposition who interacts positively and kindly with peers. But she also wrote he has had some difficulty adapting to the program. During admission, he would cry continuously and ask for his biological mother, Belkí. Well, for more on the psychological impacts family separation has on young children, we're joined by Dr. Nancy Burke. Dr. Nancy Burke is a psychoanalyst and a co-chair of the Psychotherapy Action Network, which has helped to publish a pamphlet aimed at helping immigrant parents separated from their children understand their different children who return. She's on the faculty of the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis in the Feinberg School of Medicine with Northwestern University. Dr. Burke, welcome to Democracy Now! As we're looking at this story, the little boy Michael, her little boy that she's just reunited with over a month away from him, is biting apart a Nerf football. And through the hour, it was an extended interview, he bit the whole thing apart. Talk about the effect on these children.
Is that normal reactions, and I don't like to use the word normal, but I'm going to use it in this case because I want to emphasize that normal reactions to abnormal circumstances look abnormal. So if you saw a child in a playgroup chewing on a Nerf ball, biting it to pieces, you would be very confused about that. But we can appreciate that children who don't have language and they don't have a way to express their needs and they don't have a way to express what's frightening to them would act out in their bodies. And that's something that we know over and over again. It's something that parents hopefully haven't had to see so much of. And we thought that was our role, to be able to tell parents, these are normal reactions to very abnormal circumstances. And this is really reunification with children who have been through the circumstance is really, it's either an opportunity or a real nodal point that can be extremely difficult after all of the hope and all of the final relief in the reunification. So, we wanted to be able to impart that knowledge to parents so that they have some sense of what to expect and how to react.
So talk about this brochure. It's not geared to the general public. You're doing it for the separated parents who so excited if they finally accomplish this feat of finding their children separated by the Trump administration, that they find such different children.
Absolutely, and they don't expect it. If you are in that circumstance, all of your interest, all of your hope is going to be focused on reunification, and that seems like an end to the story in itself and a happy ending, and all the more shocking than when it isn't. And so we wanted to be able to use our knowledge, the things that we sit with in our office every day when we talk to people who have been traumatized, people who are adults who have been traumatized as children. We know some things about what to expect and what the sequelae of trauma are and how long-lasting they are, how they show up. And we wanted to be able to offer that because, first of all, we just wanted to be able to prepare parents who really aren't prepared psychologically. They're really prepared to be reunited, and they're prepared to, for that one moment, and they don't really brace themselves, how could they, for the long, long period of recovery afterwards.
And what about these children that have been drugged? You have heard these previous reports we brought you, kids who are shot up with, it's not even clear what drugs when they cry for their mothers or for their fathers.
This is a really just devastating and terrible thing, because one of the things that we know is that children who are traumatized don't have access to their feelings and therefore can't put them in words, can't structure them, can't use relationships in order to be able to make them manageable. And what this does is essentially it gives children a lack of access to be able to express themselves. So in essence, it freezes them in time, and it does so in a way that's very frightening. They suddenly don't even know themselves, and their parents can't know them either. So we're very concerned about these reports.
We have less than a minute, but the long-term impact of this trauma, and what resources do these parents have? I mean, Belki, who we just played her story, is wearing an ankle monitor. It's put on by the U.S. government. She is tracked everywhere. But what resources do they have to help their children?
When we gave this pamphlet, really it's a symbol that there are other resources out there and there are organizations of concern. It really will take a village, a very long time. We did leave a space on the pamphlet for information about local organizations. We highlighted United Way, Freedom for Immigrants. We highlighted Informed Immigrant, and we wanted people to know that there were organizations. But on our pamphlet, we were really happy to be able to add something from Fred Rogers, who's helped so many American children over the years over TV, because one of the things that he says over and over again is, when you're in trouble, find a helper. And we want to encourage people to reach out. One thing we know is that trauma tends to silence people, and it tends to not be spoken of. And so we just wanted the pamphlet to be a catalyst so that things that weren't thought to be spoken of could really be spoken of with people who can help.
Nancy Burke, we want to thank you so much for being with us, psychoanalyst, co-chair of the Psychotherapy Action Network. We will link to the pamphlet you published aimed at helping immigrants' parents separated from their children. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!